Ilhan Omar stepped into the Fox News studio fully prepared to label J.D. Vance a bigot before he uttered a single word. The Ohio Marine beheld a congresswoman who had potentially wed her own sibling to secure him a green card. She had reduced 9/11ths to a vague incident where some individuals did something and instructed Somalis back home to question her nationality. He carried the very marriage documents she had been concealing for years. This event was not destined to be a standard debate, but rather a severe reckoning. Fox News had billed this evening as a conversation regarding immigration rules and cultural assimilation within the United States. However, every spectator understood the true nature of the impending clash. For a long time, grave doubts had circulated concerning Ilhan Omar that the legacy press simply declined to examine. Journalists had waved away these concerns, branding them as mere conspiracy theories or evidence of racial prejudice. Did she truly wed her brother Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi in 2009 to perpetrate visa fraud and obtain legal status for him? Why did she describe the deadliest terrorist assault on American territory as nothing more significant than a few people doing something? How precisely did a representative earning a standard government salary accumulate millions while directing nearly $3 million to her spouse's firm? Why did she disseminate anti-Semitic rhetoric so repulsive that the Democratic Party was compelled to rebuke her twice with formal resolutions? Furthermore, why did she visit Somalia and urge audiences to challenge us on our national origin instead of proudly declaring herself an American? J.D. Vance had dedicated 3 full weeks to getting ready for this specific encounter. He had not squandered his time reviewing abstract policy papers or theoretical arguments. He possessed actual marriage records from Hennepin County in Minnesota, proving Ilhan Omar wed Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi on February 12 of 2009. He held school registration documents secured by investigators in Mogadishu, listing both Ilhan and Ahmed with identical parental names. He possessed family snapshots previously shared on social networks depicting Omar and Elmi together as young children in the same home. These images had been systematically erased once the accusations began to circulate publicly. He held captured images of messages from Omar's own family members referring to Elmi as her brother in both English and Somali. These posts were archived just before the massive deletion of online history occurred. He possessed tax returns, acquired through lawful means demonstrating she filed jointly with Ahmed Hirsi during years she was legally bound to Elmi. He held the official conclusions from the Minnesota Campaign Finance Board detailing her violations. He possessed video footage of every contentious declaration she had ever uttered. He had her congressional voting history organized and verified, ready to be broadcast on the massive studio monitors. The outcome of a Marine who took his oath seriously confronting someone who possibly cheated the immigration system would reveal a massive cover-up. The shield of crying Islamophobia that had guarded Omar for years would not succeed against a veteran armed with hard proof. The Fox News studio was packed with 450 attendees, and the atmosphere was electric from the moment the doors opened. Omar's small band of backers sat clustered together, wearing hijabs and clutching signs about bigotry. They looked rebellious, yet clearly ill at ease in such deeply unfriendly surroundings. The remainder of the crowd was heavily in favor of Vance, including a large contingent of military veterans displaying their service gear. They were present specifically to witness a fellow Marine ask the questions that career politicians had been too terrified to ask. Ilhan Omar walked in first to sparse clapping from her fans and sustained jeering from everyone else. She was dressed in a vibrant hijab and a costly suit, carrying herself with the stubborn pride of someone used to dismissing all criticism as hate. She appeared ready to utilize her standard defensive maneuver against any attacks. Any critique would be labeled Islamophobia, any proof would be called fake, and any inquiry would be deemed racist. She had honed this protective barrier over 5 years in Congress and assumed it would function here as it always had. She had drastically miscalculated the capabilities of J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance stepped out half a minute later to a thunderous applause that continued for almost 4 minutes. At 39 years of age, he held the posture and haircut of the Marine he once was, dressed in a plain dark suit. He carried 3 heavy binders, which he placed beside his seat, with a purposeful thud that everyone heard. The visual difference was instant and severe. She resembled a politician braced to tell a victim's story, while he looked like a prosecutor arriving with damning evidence. Brett Baer commenced with the usual remarks about civil discourse and sticking to the issues rather than personal insults. That hopeful ambition would survive for roughly 2 minutes. Congresswoman Omar, please provide your opening statement. Omar launched into her rehearsed speech, using the distinct accent her followers loved and her detractors found irritating. Thank you, Brett, for I am here tonight because certain individuals refuse to acknowledge that a black Muslim refugee woman can serve in Congress. The hostility directed at me is grounded in Islamophobia and racial prejudice. These attacks originate from people who cannot admit that someone resembling me and holding my beliefs is truly American. However, I will not be quieted. Her supporters clapped with enthusiasm. She leaned back, appearing pleased, confident she had set the moral trap that would shield her. Vance observed her with an expression hovering between pity and disdain. When he finally spoke, his voice held that subtle Appalachian lilt that identified him as authentically working class rather than an actor. Congresswoman, I intend to discuss evidence tonight. Not theories or guesses, but actual documents and records, including your own words. I am going to ask you straightforward questions that demand yes or no responses. He opened his first binder, and the studio monitors illuminated with a picture that made Omar visibly stiffen. It was a marriage license from Hennepin County, Minnesota, dated February 12, 2009, listing Ilhan Abdullahi Omar as the spouse of Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi. Let us begin right here. The marriage license occupied every screen in the room, official and undeniable. Omar's name and Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi's name were legally bound together, documented by the state of Minnesota. Vance allowed the image to remain there. The silence in the room grew heavy and awkward. You arrived in America as a refugee in 1995, Vance started, his tone chatty yet unyielding. You were 12 years of age. Somalia was in turmoil due to civil war, so your family fled. America accepted you when your own nation could not keep you safe. We gave you security, education, and opportunity, and eventually granted you citizenship and elected you to Congress. You are one of 435 individuals selected to represent over 300 million Americans. He paused to let that history settle before proceeding. So let us discuss Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi, the man you wed in February 2009. Omar's complexion had turned ashen. She realized precisely where this line of questioning was going and had no effective answers ready because she had never been forced to reply. You married him on February 12, 2009 in Minneapolis, Minnesota, which is a matter of public record, yes or no? Omar attempted to pivot to her prepared talking points. My private marital history has been the subject of speculation. Yes or no? Vance cut in, his marine directness slicing through her evasion. Did you marry Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi on February 12, 2009? She could not refute a public marriage document that was displayed on screen for millions to witness. Yes, that marriage took place. But thank you. Now, allow me to demonstrate why millions of Americans are convinced Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi is your brother. The displays shifted to reveal old-school enrollment documents from Somalia. These were papers that investigators had spent months acquiring and authenticating. Vance moved toward the screens to explain what they depicted. These are school records from Mogadishu dating back to before you arrived in America. They list the students alongside their parents. Here is Ilhan Nur Saeed Elmi listed as a pupil. The parent names are Nur Saeed Elmi and his wife. And here in the very same records is Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi listed as a student with the exact same parent names. Nur Saeed Elmi and his wife are listed for him too. He turned to look Omar in the eye. Same parents and same household, according to these educational documents from Somalia. You and Ahmed Elmi are siblings sharing the same mother and father. The audience fell completely quiet, and even Omar's fans looked disturbed, staring at documents they could not easily explain away. Vance produced photographs next, and they materialized on the screen. These images were clearly from decades past, showing a young girl who was definitely Omar and a young boy standing together. They appeared in what seemed to be family settings, playing together in photographs clearly taken in the same home. These are family pictures that were shared on social media before they were all deleted once accusations emerged. You and Ahmed Elmi are shown as children together in the same family and household. He displayed further proof in the form of screenshots of social media posts archived prior to deletion. These were posts from individuals who appeared to be family members, written in both English and Somali. They referred to Ahmed Elmi as brother, within the context of discussing family matters. These posts come from your own relatives before everything was scrubbed from the web. They called him your brother, and your own family members referred to Ahmed Elmi as your brother. Vance walked back toward his seat, but remained standing. He selected another document and then addressed the name itself. Then there is the name Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi. Your full name is Ilhan Abdullahi Omar, but your middle names at birth were Nur Saeed. That is your father's name. Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi carries your father's name as his first and middle names. That is a Somali naming custom where children carry their father's name. He allowed all that evidence to settle for a moment before presenting the theory. Here is what investigators suspect occurred, and you will note everything I describe matches the evidence perfectly. Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi came to America and needed immigration status or a green card. He was your brother, but he could not obtain status easily on his own. You were already a United States citizen by 2009, so you married him. Brother and sister, you committed immigration fraud to secure your brother a green card via spousal immigration. The timeline flashed on the screen, and Vance narrated it like a story of deception, rather than reading a list. In 2009, you marry him, and he files for permanent resident status as your spouse. From 2009 through 2017, he establishes his status and life in America using your marriage as his legal basis. In 2017, once he is fully established and his green card is safe, you divorce him. In 2018, you legally marry Ahmed Hirsi, the man you had actually been with the entire time. He is the father of your children. Vance produced the most damaging proof yet, tax returns indicating joint filing. However, this is where the situation becomes truly fraudulent. During the years you were legally wed to Ahmed Elmi from 2009 to 2017, you were also filing joint tax returns with Ahmed Hirsi. That is a completely different man. You possessed two husbands for tax purposes, which is tax fraud added to immigration fraud. He pointed to the Minnesota Campaign Finance Board findings. Minnesota investigated this matter, discovered violations, and fined you over $3,000. You paid the penalty, which is an admission that something was incorrect with your tax filings during your marriage to Elmi. Vance stepped closer to Omar's seat. She sat motionless, unable to mount a successful defense against documents and records. Therefore, I am going to ask you directly on national television with millions of Americans watching. With all this evidence shown for everyone to see, is Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi your brother? He paused, and the silence was total. The question hung in the air while everyone waited. This was the critical moment. Omar's face flushed as she looked at her advisors off stage, then back at Vance. When she finally spoke, it was not an answer. These gross smears are rooted in Islamophobia and racism, and they have been investigated and debunked. That is not an answer. Vance cut her off, his voice hard. I asked a simple yes or no question. Is Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi your brother? I will not dignify this, she started. Yes or no? Vance's voice held the command tone Marines learn. Is he your brother? Omar would not answer and pivoted to attacking the question itself as racist. She called the evidence fabricated and the entire line of inquiry bigotry. Vance let her finish, then delivered his reply quietly but firmly. You will not say no, And that is what everyone needs to realize. I did not ask a complex policy question. I asked if a specific man is your brother, and you refused to say no. He gestured to the screen, which was still displaying the evidence. If these school records are incorrect, explain how. If these are not your family photos, clarify whose family they depict. If your relatives were lying when they called him brother, tell us why. If his name carrying your father's name is a coincidence, explain that coincidence. Vance walked back to the center of the stage. However, you will not explain any of it. You just call everyone who asks questions a racist. You will not deny he is your brother. You will not take a DNA test to prove he is not. You simply attack anyone who looks at the evidence. He turned to face her directly for his conclusion. I served in Iraq as a United States Marine. I took an oath to defend this country and its laws. I fought to protect our borders and our immigration system. You possibly committed immigration fraud and married your own brother to get him a green card. You violated federal law and defrauded the very system that saved you from Somalia. Now, you are in the United States Congress. His final line was delivered with quiet intensity. If he is not your brother, prove it. Take a DNA test and show America the results. Release your full immigration records. But you will not because you cannot. And your silence tells us everything we need to know. The audience erupted, and even some of Omar's supporters looked shaken by her refusal to simply deny the accusation. Vance did not give her time to recover or redeploy her victim narrative. He was already pulling out his next binder, and the screens were changing to show a date everyone recognized. September 11th, 2001 appeared on the screen. I was 17 years old that day. Vance began quietly, and the room went silent. This was personal. I was a senior in high school in Middletown, Ohio. I watched the news like everyone else and saw the second plane hit live. I watched the towers fall and watched people jump from burning buildings because staying inside meant burning alive. He paused, and in that pause was the memory that tens of millions of Americans shared. I joined the Marines partly because of that day. I understood we had been attacked. I knew that Al-Qaeda had declared war on America and that we had to fight back. I went to Iraq, served in a combat zone, and did my part in the war that started because 19 terrorists murdered nearly 3,000 Americans that morning. Vance looked up from his notes and directly at Omar. So let us talk about how you described September 11th. The screen showed Omar at a CARE event in March 2019. She was speaking casually, almost dismissively, about civil liberties and Muslim American rights. Then came the line that would define her callousness forever. CARE was founded after 9/11s because they recognized that some people did something and that all of us were starting to lose access to our civil liberties. Vance replayed just that one phrase. Some people did something. He let it play again. Some people did something. One more time. Some people did something. The repetition made it sound even more callous than the first hearing. Vance pulled out a list, but he did not read it like a list. He told stories. Gordon Ameth Jr. worked at Cantor Fitzgerald on the 104th floor of the North Tower. He was 32 years old. He called his mother that morning, and she heard the phone go dead. His body was never recovered. He paused before continuing. Edelmiro Abad was a senior vice president at Fiduciary Trust International. He was 54 years old, a father and husband working in the towers that morning. He is not some person who had something done. He was murdered, killed by terrorists. Vance continued with more names, not in a mechanical list but as individual human tragedies. Marie Rose Abad was 49 years old. Keith Roy Maynard was a firefighter. Andrew Anthony Abate was 37 years old. Vincent Abate was 40 years old. He looked up from his list. These are just the first few names alphabetically. The first 5 out of nearly 3,000 Americans who were murdered. They were not some people who had something done to them. They were murdered by Al-Qaeda terrorists who hijacked planes and flew them into buildings full of innocent people. Vance's voice changed from recounting names to something with real anger behind it. 343 New York City firefighters ran into those burning towers. They went up the stairs while everyone else was running down. They knew the buildings might collapse. They went anyway. And they died, crushed under millions of tons of steel and concrete. These were not some people doing something. These were heroes sacrificing themselves for strangers. He pulled out photographs from 9/11 showing the burning towers. People covered in ash fled the collapse, captured in sequence, while first responders were buried in rubble. The images were devastating, and the room was completely silent. I served with Marines who joined because of 9/11s. Guys who saw those towers fall and said, "This is my country under attack and I need to defend it." Some of them did not come home. They were killed in Iraq and Afghanistan fighting the same kind of terrorism that murdered Americans that day. Vance turned to face Omar. "And you called it 'some people did something,' like it was a parking violation, like it was a minor incident, like the worst terrorist attack on American soil was just something that happened." Omar tried to defend herself, saying that, quote, "has been taken out of context and weaponized. There is no context that makes that okay." Vance's voice rose to a shout. "No context where calling mass murder 'some people did something' is acceptable. You did not say terrorists. You did not say Al-Qaeda. You did not say attack or murdered or slaughtered. You said 'some people did something.'" He showed clips of her defending the statement when criticized. She had not apologized and hadn't clarified. She just claimed people were twisting her words and attacking her. "You never apologized and never said I should have been clearer or I should have honored the victims better. You just attacked everyone who was offended by your minimization of their tragedy." Vance walked toward center stage carrying the weight of his military service in his bearing. "America gave you refuge when Somalia was too dangerous. When your country could not protect you, you came here for safety. And then 19 terrorists attacked America and murdered nearly 3,000 people. You cannot even properly describe what happened. Can't honor the dead. Can't call it terrorism." He let that sink in before continuing. "I wore the uniform and fought in the war that came from that day. I lost friends who never came home. And you minimize their sacrifice. You minimize the attack that started it all. You minimize nearly 3,000 murdered Americans as some people did something." Vance returned to his chair and delivered his final assessment, sitting down looking directly at Omar. "That is not just offensive. That is not just insensitive. That is contempt. Contempt for America. Contempt for the victims. Contempt for everyone who served and sacrificed. You cannot even honor Americans properly when they are murdered by terrorists. That disqualifies you from representing Americans in Congress." The silence that followed was profound. Even Omar's supporters could not find a defense for those words. The evidence was her own voice, minimizing mass murder. Nearly 3,000 murdered Americans called some people did something. She never apologized. Vance moved immediately to his next attack, giving Omar no chance to reset or regain footing. "Let us talk about anti-Semitism because your hatred of Jews is so obvious and so vile that your own party was forced to condemn you. Not Republicans, but your own Democrats, twice." The screen displayed House Resolution 183 dated March 7, 2019. Omar tried to interrupt with her standard defense about criticizing Israel not being anti-Semitism, but Vance spoke over her. "This is not about Israel policy. This is about you spreading classic anti-Semitic tropes that have been used to justify violence against Jews for centuries. Let me show everyone exactly what you said." The screens filled with Omar's tweets, and Vance read them aloud like he was quoting someone in a conversation. February 10, 2019. Someone asks you why American politicians support Israel. Your response, quote, "It is all about the Benjamin's baby," end quote, with a money bag emoji. He let that sit for a moment. You are saying Jews buy political support with money, that American politicians only support Israel because Jews pay them to do so, that Jews control politics with cash. That is textbook anti-Semitism. Jews secretly controlling things with money is Nazi propaganda. Congresswoman, the next tweet appeared, and Vance read it with the same deliberate pace. November 16, 2012. Your tweet, quote, "Israel has hypnotized the world. May Allah awaken the people and help them see the evil doings of Israel, end quote. Vance looked up from the screen. Hypnotize the world. You are saying Jews have mystical powers to control and hypnotize people to make the world blind to their evil. That is another classic anti-Semitic trope that appears in the protocols of the Elders of Zion. That is one of the most anti-Semitic texts ever written. He showed more tweets where she compared Israel to Nazi Germany, where she suggested Jewish Americans had dual loyalty, where she spread conspiracy theories about Jewish influence. This is not criticizing Israeli policy. This is spreading hatred of Jews using the same language and same tropes that have been used to persecute them for centuries. Vance pulled out the House resolutions and narrated what they meant, rather than just displaying them. Your own party was so embarrassed that they did something Congress almost never does. They passed an official resolution specifically because of your statements. H-Res 183 from March 2019 saw the House of Representatives officially condemn anti-Semitism in response to your tweets. He showed the vote count, 407 to 23. Nearly unanimous. Democrats and Republicans together. Your own party leadership, including Nancy Pelosi and Steny Hoyer, all voted to condemn what you said. Vance paused before delivering the kicker, and then you did it again. You could not help yourself and made more anti-Semitic statements, so they had to condemn you again. The second resolution appeared, H-Res 241 from July 2019. A second resolution 4 months after the first one. Your own party had to officially rebuke you twice in 4 months for Jew hatred. When has that ever happened to any member of Congress? He let that question hang unanswered before continuing. You voted against Iron Dome funding. That is the defensive system that protects Israeli civilians from Hamas rockets. You were one of only 9 members to vote no, not voting against offensive weapons or military aid, voting against defending civilians from terrorist attacks. Vance's voice took on that Marine intensity again. I served with Jewish Marines. They were some of the bravest people I have ever known. I bled with them and trusted them with my life. And you spread conspiracy theories about Jews controlling the world with money. He walked closer to her chair. You support BDS, the movement to boycott, divest, and sanction. That is economic warfare against the only democracy in the Middle East. You compare Israel to apartheid South Africa. You vote against every measure supporting Israel's defense. You side with Hamas and Hezbollah over a democratic ally. The final assessment came with genuine disgust. Your own Democrats condemned you twice, not Republicans who disagree with you. Your own party leadership was so embarrassed by your anti-Semitism they had to pass official resolutions rebuking you. That is how bad your Jew hatred is. Vance sat back down, having made his point with the Democrats' own condemnations. You cannot hide behind criticism of Israel when you are spreading the same anti-Semitic tropes the Nazis used. When your own party condemns you twice, that is not policy disagreement. That is bigotry. Vance grabbed his next folder, and the screen displayed a company logo, E Street Group. Let us talk about money. Specifically, campaign money going to your husband's company. The name appeared on screen as Tim Minot, followed by the company E Street Group, LLC. Then the number that made everyone gasp appeared, $2,800,000. Your husband, Tim Minot, owns E Street Group, a political consulting firm. Since 2018, your campaign has paid his company approximately $2.8 million. Vance let that enormous number sit before continuing. But let us talk about how Tim became your husband, because that story involves an affair, 2 broken marriages, and millions in campaign funds flowing through it all. He pulled out divorce filings and narrated them like a timeline of scandal. In 2018, Tim Minot is married to Beth Minette. His company starts working for your campaign. You are married to Ahmed Hirsi at this time. Tim's company gets hired and payments start flowing. The timeline appeared on screen, but Vance told it as a story rather than reading bullet points. In August 2019, Beth Minot files for divorce from Tim. In the divorce filing, she makes a specific allegation. Quote, Defendant's more recent travel and long work hours now appear to be more related to his affair with Representative Ilhan Omar, end quote. Vance showed the actual court document with that section highlighted. She is saying her husband was having an affair with you, that his travel for your campaign was cover for the affair. This is in official court documents under oath. The timeline continued. In October 2019, you divorce Ahmed Hirsi, your third husband. In December, less than 2 months later, you are photographed with Tim Minett. In March 2020, you married Tim Minett. Vance walked toward center stage. So, to summarize, Tim worked for your campaign. You started an affair while both married to other people. His wife filed for divorce, citing your affair specifically. You both divorced your spouses. You married each other. And through all of this, your campaign kept paying his company hundreds of thousands of dollars. He pulled out the payment records and narrated them. Travel services, consulting fees, media production, and digital strategy. Nearly $3 million total paid to your husband's company. Money from campaign donors, from working Americans giving small dollar donations, going into your husband's pocket. The Minnesota findings appeared on screen. The Minnesota Campaign Finance Board investigated. They found violations. They issued the largest fine ever levied against a sitting House member at that time, $3,469. You paid the fine. That is an admission something was wrong. Vance's voice shifted to genuine working-class outrage. I grew up in Appalachia. My family struggled with poverty and addiction. We did not have connections or money. We had to work our way up through the Marines and school. You came here as a refugee with nothing, and somehow, now you are wealthy. You are paying your husband millions in campaign funds. You are using donor money to enrich your family. He turned to face her directly. The FEC has received multiple complaints alleging you are using campaign funds for personal benefit, that you are funneling donor money to yourself through your husband's company. That is not legal. That is not ethical. That is theft with paperwork. His conclusion came with that Marine directness. You came to America with nothing. America gave you opportunity, and you are using it to steal from working people's campaign donations, to enrich your husband, to pay your family members. That is not public service. That is corruption. Vance pulled out video footage with visible anticipation. This was going to hurt her badly. In August 2022, you visited Somalia. You went to Mogadishu. You spoke to large crowds. Want to see what you told them? The screen showed Omar in Somalia wearing traditional dress. She was speaking passionately in Somali to an enthusiastic crowd. Subtitles appeared translating her words. Ask us what country we are from. Vance played it again. Ask us what country we are from. One more time. Ask us what country we are from. The repetition made the meaning unmistakable. You told Somalis to ask you what country you are from. Not I am an American congresswoman representing Minnesota. Not I serve the United States in Congress. You told them to ask you what country you are from. He paused, then asked the obvious question. So I am asking, what country are you from? Omar tried to give a complex answer about diaspora communities and transnational identity. She spoke about maintaining cultural connections. Simple question, Vance interrupted. What country are you from? She could not give a simple America answer. She kept talking about being part of both worlds and representing Somali Americans. She spoke about understanding their unique perspective. Can't say America, Vance observed quietly. Can't say I'm from America or I'm American first. Can't clearly state where your loyalty lies. He pulled out the oath of office and read it with the gravity of someone who had taken many oaths seriously. I do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same. He looked up. Allegiance to the United States. Not to Somalia. Not to any other country. To America. That is what you swore when you took office. Vance set down the oath document and spoke from personal experience. I took that oath when I joined the Marines. I meant every word. I was willing to die for it. I served in Iraq in a combat zone. That is what allegiance to America looks like. He turned to face Omar directly. You took that same oath, but you go to Somalia and cannot clearly say you are American. You tell them to ask what country you are from. You promote Somalia's interests in your speeches. The voting record appeared on screen, and Vance narrated her pattern. You vote against American interests constantly. Against condemning Hamas. Against supporting Israel. Against sanctions on Iran. Against defense measures. You side with countries and groups hostile to America over and over. He walked closer. I served one country. I wore one flag on my uniform. I fought for one nation, America. Who are you serving? Because your Somalia speech and your voting record raise questions. Your refusal to say America first raises serious questions. Vance's voice became harder. I have friends buried at Arlington Cemetery. Marines who died defending America. They knew which country they served. They gave everything for America. And you are in Congress. You took the same oath, but you cannot clearly state you put America first. His conclusion was devastating. America saved you from Somalia. We gave you everything Somalia could not. Safety, education, citizenship, and Congress. And you go back to Somalia and will not even clearly say you are American. The final line came quietly, but with absolute finality. Maybe you are representing the wrong country. Vance pulled out his final prepared evidence before the climax. Video footage from an interview. This is you discussing a college course. Watch what you do when terrorism gets mentioned. The clip played. A professor or interviewer mentioned Al-Qaeda and Hezbollah in the context of discussing how they were characterized in the class. As each name was said, Omar made exaggerated air quotes with her fingers. She had a mocking expression on her face. She suggested the designation of these groups as terrorists was somehow questionable. Vance replayed it twice without commentary. The air quotes were so obvious and so dismissive that they spoke for themselves. I served in Iraq, Vance began when the clip finished. His voice was quiet, but intense. I fought against the same kind of terrorism that Al-Qaeda represents. I saw what terrorists do up close. I lost friends to IEDs, to ambushes, and to suicide bombers. Marines who did not come home because of the same ideology Al-Qaeda spreads. He paused, establishing his credibility on this topic through lived experience before continuing. And you make air quotes like, Al-Qaeda is not really a terrorist organization. Like, it is debatable whether they are actually terrorists. The numbers appeared on screen, and Vance recited them from memory. Al-Qaeda murdered nearly 3,000 Americans on September 11th. They hijacked 4 planes. They flew them into the Twin Towers and the Pentagon. They tried to hit either the White House or Capitol, but only failed because passengers fought back on Flight 93. His voice rose. Marines I served with were in that war because of what Al-Qaeda did. Some of them are dead because of terrorists, and you make air quotes suggesting they are not really terrorists. He showed the Hezbollah connection. Hezbollah killed 241 United States Marines in Beirut in October 1983. It was a truck bomb. Marines were sleeping in their barracks. They were murdered by terrorists while serving their country. Vance walked toward Omar's chair. And you make air quotes suggesting Hezbollah is not really a terrorist group. He pulled together the pattern of her statements and votes. You minimize 9/11s as some people did something. You make air quotes about Al-Qaeda and Hezbollah. You vote against anti-terrorism measures. You oppose designating groups as terrorists. You defend countries that sponsor terrorism. The pattern is clear. The question came with marine intensity. I fought terrorism. You make excuses for it. Simple question. Is Al-Qaeda a terrorist organization, yes or no? Omar could not give a simple yes. She started explaining context in American foreign policy and blowback and complexity. Yes or no? Vance demanded, using that command voice. Is Al-Qaeda a terrorist organization? She kept deflecting. She refused to give a direct answer. Vance let her refusal stand as its own indictment. You cannot even clearly call Al-Qaeda terrorists. You cannot condemn the group that killed nearly 3,000 Americans. You cannot honor the Marines who died fighting them. His conclusion was absolute. I took an oath to defend America against enemies. You took that oath, too. But you are not sure who the enemies are. That is not just wrong. That is dangerous. That disqualifies you from national security decisions or representing Americans in any capacity. Vance stood and walked to center stage for this final statement. He left his folders behind. This was going to come from conviction and memory rather than notes. I want to make something very clear before we end tonight. I think every American watching needs to understand what we are really talking about here. He paused, gathering his thoughts, or perhaps his emotion. I was 17 when 9/11 happened. I watched those towers fall. I understood America was under attack. I joined the Marines because I wanted to serve the country that gave my family opportunity. It gave us a chance when we were struggling. His voice carried the weight of that service. I went to Iraq, to a combat zone. I saw my friends get hurt. I saw some not come home. I did my part in defending America against the same terrorism that killed nearly 3,000 people that Tuesday morning. That is what taking the oath seriously looks like. That is what allegiance to America means. He walked a few steps, then turned to face Omar. You came here as a refugee in 1995. You were 12 years old. Somalia was in chaos, a failed state with violence and starvation. Your family fled, and America took you in. We gave you safety when your country could not protect you. We gave you education, citizenship, and opportunity. You became a United States Congresswoman, one of the most powerful positions in American government. Vance let that sink in before continuing. America gave you everything. So let me list how you repaid that gift. What followed was the comprehensive indictment, delivered not as bullet points, but as a narrative of betrayal. You possibly committed immigration fraud by marrying your brother. The evidence is overwhelming. School records show the same parents. Family photos show you as children together. Relatives called him brother. His name carries your father's name. You committed tax fraud by filing with two men. You will not deny he is your brother. You will not take a DNA test. You will not answer the simple question. You just call everyone racist for asking. He moved to the next betrayal. You minimized September 11th. You called it, "Some people did something." It was the worst terrorist attack on American soil with nearly 3,000 murdered Americans. I fought in the war that came from that day. You cannot even honor the victims properly. You never apologized. You defended your minimization. The third betrayal was that you spread anti-Semitism so vile your own Democrats condemned you twice. They passed official House resolutions 407 to 23. Your own party was so embarrassed they had to officially rebuke you for Jew hatred. You used classic anti-Semitic tropes. Jews controlling things with money. Jews hypnotizing the world. It is the same language Nazis used. Fourth, you paid nearly $3 million to your husband's company. You had an affair with him while both married to others. You got the largest Minnesota campaign finance fine ever. You used donor money to enrich your family. It is corruption disguised as consulting. Fifth, you went to Somalia and told them to ask what country you are from. You cannot clearly say you are American. You will not say America first. You promote Somalia's interests and vote against American interests. There are dual loyalty questions that you will not clearly answer. Sixth, you make air quotes about Al-Qaeda. You cannot clearly call them terrorists, the group that murdered nearly 3,000 Americans, that Marines like me fought against. You are not sure they are really bad. Vance stopped walking and stood still at center stage looking directly at Omar. We both took oaths to America, to defend the Constitution against all enemies, to bear true faith and allegiance. His voice rose with conviction. I honored that oath. I served in combat. I was willing to die for America. That is what my oath meant to me. He pointed at her. You broke that oath. You possibly defrauded the immigration system. You definitely spread anti-Semitism. You clearly enriched yourself. You obviously showed more loyalty to Somalia than America. You certainly minimized terrorism and American victims. The personal element came through now. Marine to Marine values. I have friends at Arlington. They are Marines who died for this country. They took their oaths seriously. They gave everything. And you spit on their sacrifice by being in Congress while possibly being an immigration fraudster. You are definitely an anti-Semite. You are clearly corrupt. You are obviously more loyal to Somalia than America. Vance walked closer to her chair for his final statement. You came here with nothing. America gave you everything. And you have spent your time attacking America. You have defrauded America. You have spread hate. You have enriched yourself. You are serving Somalia's interests instead of America's. He turned to the cameras and the millions watching. Americans deserve representatives who love this country, who serve it honorably, who keep their oaths. Not someone who possibly committed fraud, someone who definitely spread hatred, someone who clearly got corrupt, someone who will not say America first. Back to Omar for the final line. I served America. You defrauded it. That is the difference between us. And America deserves better than you. The standing ovation lasted 7 full minutes. The chants of USA mixed with investigate Omar and lock her up. The sound was deafening. Marine veterans in the audience stood at attention, some saluting Vance. Omar sat unable to respond. Every point was backed by evidence. The marriage certificates and the school records, her own words on video, House resolutions and campaign finance records, the Somalia speech, all documented and all undeniable. The Islamophobia defense had failed against a Marine with receipts. The video reached 198 million views within 1 week. It became one of the most watched political confrontations in American history. But the views were only part of the impact. Within 48 hours of the debate, the FBI faced overwhelming public pressure to investigate the marriage fraud allegations. Republican congressmen demanded answers about why the allegations had never been properly investigated. Conservative media ran detailed segments about the evidence Vance had presented. Even some mainstream outlets had to acknowledge the documents were real and the questions legitimate. The phrase, "Is Ahmed El-Mi your brother?" trended for 2 straight weeks. Conservative groups organized DNA test challenge campaigns demanding Omar prove her innocence. The fact that she would not simply deny it or take a test became the story itself. Even neutral observers noted that innocent people usually just say no to such accusations. Her own Democratic Party began distancing themselves with a speed that showed how toxic she had become. Nancy Pelosi refused to defend her when asked. Chuck Schumer gave a statement about every member being responsible for their own past. Committee assignments she had hoped for went to other members. Invitations to party events dried up. Behind the scenes, leadership made clear she was on her own. The military veteran community responded with particular intensity. Veterans groups that normally stayed out of politics organized campaigns demanding her removal from Congress. Marine Corps veteran organizations specifically praised Vance for asking questions others were afraid to voice. The contrast between a Marine who had served and a congresswoman who had possibly defrauded immigration became a rallying point. Muslim Americans were deeply divided. Many condemned Omar, saying she embarrassed their community and did not represent them. Other Muslim members of Congress distanced themselves, with one stating publicly her controversies are hers alone. Some defended her, calling the attacks Islamophobic. But they struggled to explain away the evidence Vance had shown. 6 months after the debate, a moderate Democrat announced a primary challenge to Omar in Minnesota's 5th District. His campaign launch video featured clips of Vance's questioning, particularly the brother marriage allegations and the Somalia speech. His slogan was, "America first, not Somalia first." His first-week fundraising brought in over $4 million from donors nationwide. Polling in her district showed Omar's support collapsing from 61% to 38%. Her unfavorable ratings spiked to 59%. The combination of possible immigration fraud, anti-Semitism, campaign finance corruption, and questionable loyalty had damaged her even in one of America's most liberal districts. 1 year after the debate, facing certain primary defeat and possible FBI investigation, Omar announced she would not seek re-election to Congress. The statement cited wanting to focus on other ways to serve the community. But everyone understood the real message. Vance had destroyed her politically by asking questions she could not answer. He presented evidence she could not refute. The Marine had done what mainstream media never would. He asked the uncomfortable questions. He showed the uncomfortable evidence. He demanded uncomfortable answers. And when Omar tried to hide behind accusations of bigotry, his military service gave him armor. Her typical defenses could not penetrate. This was not a debate between competing political philosophies or policy preferences. This was a confrontation between someone who had served America in combat and someone who had possibly defrauded the system he had defended, between documented military sacrifice and alleged immigration fraud, between a Marine's oath and a Congresswoman's betrayal. J.D. Vance had deployed something Omar had never faced before: evidence she could not dismiss, and credibility she could not attack. When she called the marriage fraud allegations racist, he showed marriage certificates and school records. When she tried victim narratives, he showed House resolutions where her own Democrats condemned her. When she attacked his motivations, he pointed to his military service in Iraq. Every defense she had used successfully for years failed against a Marine who had done his homework. The evidence was undeniable. Marriage certificates showing her union to Ahmed Nursaid Elmi. School records listing both of them with same parents. Family photographs showing them as children together. Her own relatives calling him brother before mass deletion. Tax documents showing joint filing with two different men. Minnesota findings documenting violations. House resolutions condemning her anti-Semitism twice. Campaign finance records showing millions to her husband. Video of her minimizing 9/11s. Footage of her telling Somalis to ask what country she is from. Her air quotes about Al-Qaeda. All documented, all verified, and all impossible to dismiss as conspiracy theories when displayed on screen. But perhaps most damaging was what she could not do. She could not simply deny Ahmed Elmi was her brother. She could not take a DNA test to prove innocence. She could not clearly say she put America first. She could not call Al-Qaeda terrorists without hesitation. Her silence and evasion told more than any accusation could. Vance proved that military service gives moral authority that transcends political correctness. That evidence defeats victimhood narratives. That asking hard questions is not bigotry when you have receipts. And that America deserves representatives who love the country enough to defend it in combat, not ones who possibly defrauded it to bring family members. If you think Ilhan Omar should be investigated for immigration fraud, share this story. If you believe a Marine who served in Iraq earned the right to question someone who possibly defrauded the system he defended, comment investigate. Because Vance asked the questions America needed answered. He showed the evidence media would not examine. He demanded accountability from someone who had hidden behind accusations of bigotry for too long. The receipts do not lie, and neither do Marines.